It's about 0600 here in Albuquerque, so it's not quite light yet. Let's go back. And this is day 3 of the workshop. And you'll notice behind me that Godzilla has appeared for the workshop. He's interested in the Cantabrian discussion today. I've talked to him, and his audio is muted for the time being, and I don't really know whether he's for or against the Cantabrian. But anyway, let's talk about today's presentations briefly. Next slide. Okay, this is the program for the day, but we have one change in the program, and that is that at the last minute, Howard Falcon Lang could not make the meeting, and we were very lucky that Sandra Chicot, who's been working with Bill and others on Kasimovian floras and Western Pangea, she will take Howard's spot and present a talk on that subject. Next slide. So if you break down today's talks, we're gonna hear talks on 3 different topics. The first 2 talks are gonna be on marine invertebrate biotic events, and we've already heard some talks that address that. On day 1, the conodont talks, of course, were all about marine biotic events in the conodonts, and we also even learned from Jim Barrick and Steve Roscoe about other extinctions that occur across the Des Moines Missourian boundary. And of course, Phil Heckel talked about that briefly yesterday. And in the upper right here, you see the fusolinid Triticytes, which is, to me, emblematic of the huge change in fusolinids that occurs when we go from the middle to the late Pennsylvanian. And of course, on day 1, Katsumi Ueno talked about that at some length, not only the actual changes that occurred, but what is the biology of that change. It's a really interesting turning point in fusolinid evolution. The bulk of the talks today, of course, are going to be on paleobotany and what I would call botanical biotic events, palynology and macrofossil plants in the middle to late Pennsylvanian. And then the last 2 talks, and we sort of set this up, we set up a debate between John Nelson and John Knight over the Cantabrian stage or substage, which was a concept, a chronostratigraphic concept that Bob Wagner introduced decades ago, and that has been a source of some controversy, as some of you know, particularly among North American workers. So we're going to have a set-up debate about the Cantabrian pro and contra, and that I think will be very interesting. Next slide. Again, the marine, I have a lot of questions actually in my own mind about marine biotic events in the middle to late Pennsylvanian, particularly of the macrofauna, because I can't easily find a lot of discussion of what might have happened in big ways. So we're going to hear from Georgi Morantsev about the crinoid fauna specifically, and Yukun Shi is going to talk about diversity dynamics in the middle to late, in the Kasimovian particularly, I guess. Next slide. I want someone to explain this to me because I've never understood why this might be the case. This is, some of you know that Stanley and Powell about 15 years ago published the idea that the whole late Paleozoic Ice Age, or at least the Pennsylvanian part of it, was a time of sluggish evolution because of the ice ages. And no offense to them, but it makes no sense to me. I don't get it. I wonder if this is just an artifact of the compilation, the paleobiology database, or whatever compilation it was that they used. So maybe the marine Yukun Shi can maybe talk about this. I'm sorry to force that. You don't have to, but try, please. Next. And in a way, the reason this Kasimovian is such a big deal to many is the botanical change, the change in the floras that occurs as you go from the middle into the late Pennsylvanian. So we're going to have a fair amount of discussion of that in everything from the biostratigraphy of the polynomorphs and the macroplants to Pennsylvanian wildfires, evidence for that in Gondwana. Next slide. And Bill already showed this diagram. This is, to me, this is like a classic figure for what we're talking about. It was published by Tom Phillips and others almost half a century ago, and it shows that what was then known about the botanical change in North America. And that change has been called kind of sensationalistically the Carboniferous rainforest collapse. But at least in my understanding, it looks to me like something that probably began in the Moscovian, really maybe had a big kick right across the boundary and continued on into the Kasimovian. So I'm not sure it's a single synchronous event, but we'll be enlightened about that, I think, by today's speakers. Next slide. And then the Cantabrian stage. I mean, Wagner proposed it decades ago, and one of the problems is that, of course, he himself redefined it more than once. So it's had a kind of moving definition. And then there were big problems correlating it into the North American section. Next slide. And indeed, you'll see here that the inability to recognize the Cantabrian flora or in the North American section led to the idea that there was a huge hiatus in the North American section. You see that shown on the right as Wagner's Stephanian Gap. And of course, some of you know the paper that Falk and Lang and others wrote critiquing that idea. And then of course, Bob Wagner responded in print. And Bob Wagner is no longer able to participate, of course. He died, I think, a couple of years ago, but John Knight, I think, will well represent his viewpoint. Next slide. So this is the day. We're going to talk about marine biotic events, 2 talks. We're going to talk about paleobotany. We've got 5 talks, and then we have a debate on the Cantabrian.